They say New Ravenhurst never sleeps, but for me, it never forgets. My name is Sharon, and what you're about to read isn't a story of ambition. It's the anatomy of betrayal, carefully dissected beneath the city's glittering skyline. It begins not with triumph, but with an open wound disguised as a beginning, on the 41st floor of a brownstone tower overlooking Halbert Avenue, where the scent of hot asphalt met the cold steel of unspoken truths. I was raised in the churning heart of this city, where the air pulsed with the rhythm of tireless hunger. My childhood was a cocktail of neon lights, late-night mergers, and boardroom whispers. And my father, Richard, was at the center of it all. The founder of Carter Innovations, a titan in the world of tech and strategy, a man admired and feared in equal measure. To the public, he was the embodiment of Amgarian genius. To me, he was a storm in a tailored suit. My mother, Nancy, was the only softness in that hard-edged world. She moved like silence through our lives, elegant, quiet, fading far too soon. When she died, I was 12, the house lost all warmth. From then on, I was raised by discipline, ambition, and cold dinners alone. Grief left no space for childish things, and affection was replaced with expectations. I learned early that nothing came without cost. Certainly not love, and least of all approval. Even as his only daughter, I was just another pawn in my father's empire of power and perfection. There were no shortcuts. No promises. After 4 grueling winters in university up in Boston, I returned to the City of Knives. Not as a princess returning to her palace, but as a soldier, sleeves rolled, spine straight. The world expected me to slide into a plush corner office. Instead, I took a desk by the window in business development, just another cog in the billion-dollar machine. I welcomed the whispers of nepotism, they gave me something to push against. Outside, Halbert Avenue buzzed with the daily theater of dreamers, schemers, and the damned. I walked among them every morning, laptop slung over one shoulder, caffeine in hand, fury in my chest. Fury that I had to earn a place in something I helped build from the inside out. Carter Innovations was valued at $2. $1 billion when I joined. My father called that the foundation, not the summit. This is just the overture, he'd mutter, eyes fixed on Midtown from behind glass, like a general preparing for war. My team then? A mix of allies and enemies cloaked as colleagues. There was Stephen, methodical and soft-spoken, a mind built for puzzles. Michelle, my lifeline, brilliant, sharp, the kind of woman who always knew when to speak and when to simply stand beside you. And then there was Brian. Brian was the golden son my father never had. All teeth and timing. The kind of man who could sell poison as a cure and make you thank him for it. He played the part of rising star so well that sometimes even I believed it. He charmed his way to the top, claimed Richardies he hadn't earned, always with that glint in his eye, a glint that said he knew exactly where the knives were kept. And how to use them. Those first years blurred into late nights and cold coffee. I memorized contract clauses like scripture, pored over spreadsheets until my vision blurred, and sat silently through meetings absorbing everything. While others left for birthday parties or rooftop cocktails, I stayed behind, building my arsenal. I sacrificed more than sleep. I lost touch with friends, forgot birthdays, skipped holidays. But I told myself it was the price of becoming indispensable. Of forcing my father to see me not just as a Carter, but as the Carter who could carry his legacy forward. So when Carter Innovations eyed expansion into Darnell, our code name for Chicago, I didn't hesitate. I'll go, I said before he even finished the sentence. The winters in Darnell were brutal, but the competition was worse. It was a different kind of battlefield, but I thrived there. We carved out space in hostile territory, turned losses into leads, clawed our way into the Midwestern SteveNet. 2 years later, I did it again, this time on the West Coast. Los Imperium was chaos in designer sunglasses. Media sharks, tech billionaires, the constant buzz of reinvention. It taught me speed, deception, and survival. Late nights in my sterile apartment, I'd sometimes wonder if this path, these sacrifices, were worth it. I kept thinking that one day my father would call, not for a status update, but to ask how I was. He never did. Still, I pushed forward. Over 11 years, I led teams through product launches, multi-million-dollar contracts, and financial minefields that nearly broke us. I became fluent in solving the impossible. My phone filled with 3 a.m. notes, half-formed ideas scrawled in a haze of exhaustion and suppressed rage. I had allies, Michelle, loyal and grounded. Stephen, brilliant and fair. And I had shadows, Brian chief among them. He moved with grace and arrogance, always at the center of applause, always absorbing the light that others bled for. Sometimes, in quiet moments, jealousy curled in my throat like smoke. But I swallowed it. Always. By my 11th year, Carter Innovations had grown to $950 million in annual profits. On paper, it was a triumph. But triumph can be deceptive. Because behind the headlines, behind the high rises and smiles, something rotted beneath the surface. And I felt it. Like a blade sheathed just beneath the skin. Waiting. Our name, Carter Innovations, was etched into the walls of power, whispered in boardrooms from Lyon to San Diego, flashing across trade journals, digital billboards, and keynote screens at global tech summits. But inside those glass towers, some truths never changed. Despite the accolades, my father remained my fiercest skeptic. "Sharon, why can't you be more like Brian?" he'd ask, without flinching, in front of the very teams I led. "He's bold, visible, he knows how to sell himself." It was a routine dissection of my supposed shortcomings, performed with surgical indifference. Brian Harris, the golden boy. Always in the spotlight when praise was due, conveniently absent when the hard work began. While my team stayed late, troubleshooting broken code and salvaging missed deadlines, Brian circulated gala circuits and investor mixers. He harvested applause from seeds we planted. I told myself it didn't matter. That the sting of being overlooked was fleeting. But it wasn't. Every ignored win, every backhanded comparison, every nod he received that I had earned, it built a quiet storm inside me. Still, I said nothing. I believed that silent integrity would outlast hollow charisma. I wanted his respect, no, I ached for it. For once, I wanted my father to see me not through the prism of family, but as a strategist, a builder, a leader. As someone worthy of the legacy I was upholding without applause. I thought if I just kept grinding, enduring the thankless nights, the cities lived out of suitcases, he'd eventually see the woman, not just the daughter. The morning of my promotion began like something sacred. I hadn't slept. The silence outside my Highgate Square apartment felt unnatural, like the city was holding its breath with me. Light bled slowly into the room, pale and expectant. I wore the navy suit I'd saved for the moment that would finally steven the shift. I took time on my hair, a little more precision in the eyeliner, the smallest allowance for vanity. In the mirror, for a flicker of a second, I imagined his pride. Maybe even a rare hug. I was foolish enough to hope. The Carter Innovations tower buzzed as usual, but there was an undercurrent, a ripple in the routine. Quiet nods. Half smiles. Whispers that paused as I passed. Did they already know? Was the decision made? I kept walking, shoulders back, adrenaline and fear swirling under my skin. This was supposed to be it, the culmination of 11 unrelenting years. Missed Christmases. Cancelled birthdays. 1,000 silent flights, 1,000 compromises. I had carved success out of sacrifice. The boardroom was already filling. Familiar faces, department heads, executives, ghosts of meetings past. Michelle sat at the far end, offering me a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Stephen gave a quiet nod from behind his laptop. And there, near the side table, stood Brian Harris, calm, polished, laughing. His suit was perfect. His smile even more so. As if he knew something the rest of us didn't. Then came my father, Richard, stationed at the head of the room like a judge about to pass sentence. When our eyes met, I thought I caught it, a flicker of recognition. Or maybe that was just the echo of every unspoken wish. The meeting began with ceremonial chatter. Metrics, milestones, records broken. My father's voice was steady, practiced. He thanked the team for unparalleled commitment and spoke of the company's bright horizon. I barely heard him. My attention kept drifting to the empty chair across the table, reserved, I assumed, for the new vice president. My chair. My palms were damp. The room felt warm, too bright, too slow. I forced myself to steady my breathing. This was the moment. I had endured too much for it not to be. And then he spoke. "It's time to announce the new vice president," my father said, his voice cutting clean through the tension. My chest tightened. Michelle turned slightly in her seat. Stephen looked up. "This person," he continued, "has demonstrated exceptional drive and innovation. A fresh voice with unwavering ambition." I held still, heartbeat thundering. I saw it, everything I had imagined, flashing before me in that brief breath between sentences, the pride, the acknowledgement, the redemption. "Congratulations, Brian," he said. There was a pause. A breathless, stunned second that seemed to stretch across time. Then the slow clap began. Applause. It echoed like gunfire. I sat frozen, spine ramrod straight, but everything inside me shattered. I didn't blink. I couldn't. Michelle's hand tightened around her notebook. Stephen stared into his lap. Brian smiled. I didn't hear the rest of the meeting. My ears were filled with the roar of 11 years collapsing all at once. I had given everything. My time. My faith. My loyalty. All of it. And in return, I got a front row seat to my own erasure. What they didn't know, what he didn't know, was that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of reckoning. The beginning of retribution. It felt as though the ground had vanished beneath me, no warning, no mercy. My father's voice was still echoing through the boardroom, full of praise for Brian's vision and leadership, words that landed like shrapnel in my chest. I heard them, but only distantly, as though through water. The oxygen had been sucked from the room, and all that remained was a cold, airless silence and the ache of disbelief. Michelle's mouth was slightly open in shock. Stephen stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. And then it got worse. Far worse. My father turned toward me with a smile so sharp it could have drawn blood. "Sharon," he said, in a tone so casually cruel it burned, "perhaps you could take a few notes from Brian. You might learn what real leadership looks like." A few people let out those awkward, strangled laughs people do when they don't know if it's a joke, or if they're supposed to pretend it is. My skin burned. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But he wasn't finished. "You know," he continued, folding his arms like a judge about to sentence the guilty, "this industry isn't for everyone. It's harsh, demanding. Maybe you're just not cut out for it." The words struck harder than I expected. There it was, the sentence, handed down without appeal. From the man I had given everything to. Still, part of me clung to the absurd hope that this was some test, some cruel performance meant to harden me further. But the look on his face? Stone. Cold. Certainty. Then came the final blow. "We're letting you go, Sharon," he said flatly. "The company no longer needs you. You're free to pack your things and leave." A silence followed, heavy and total. The kind that swallows everything. Every eye turned to me. I could feel them, pitying, curious, some even gleeful. The stares, the whispers already beginning. The predator had devoured its prey, and the boardroom was simply watching the final twitch. For a moment, I wasn't sure my legs would obey me. My whole body trembled with rage, humiliation, heartbreak. 11 years, all erased with one sentence. But I would not break here. Not in front of him. Not in front of Brian. I straightened my back, clenched my jaw, and lifted my chin. I would leave on my terms, not his. Without a word, I walked out. The murmurs followed like smoke, but I didn't look back. I passed through the same corridors I had once walked with pride, past the desk where it all began, past framed photos celebrating milestones I had helped forge. They looked like artifacts now. Ghosts. In my office, Michelle appeared silently. She pulled me into a hug, her arms trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I could feel her holding back tears. I squeezed her hand. "I'll be okay," I lied. But some lies are necessary. Some lies are shields. I packed methodically, the photo of my mother and me from when I was 12. A potted rosemary plant she once gave me. Scribbled notes, sketches, fragments of plans that would never see daylight under the Carter name. All of it into a cardboard box. My entire legacy, reduced to 12 by 12 inches of corrugated paper. As I exited the building, my building, one last time, I stopped. The sign above gleamed, Carter Innovations, towering against the new Ravenhurst skyline. Once, that view had stirred something in me. A sense of purpose. Belonging. Now it felt like a lie, etched in glass and steel. I stood in the street, the late autumn air brushing my face, sharp and clean. I had no title. No plan. No clear future. But I had something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not the kind you celebrate. The kind that comes after you've lost everything. And in that freedom, something darker stirred. Something ancient and sharp. Not revenge, not yet. But the cold seed of reckoning, buried deep. Let them think they'd erased me. Let them laugh. I would not be the footnote in their story. I would write my own. And they would read every word of it. The next chapter began with distance. I left New Ravenhurst within a week. The skyline that once ignited my ambition now looked sterile and cruel, like a monument to everything I'd lost. I needed air, space, silence. I needed to breathe somewhere my father's shadow didn't reach. San Meridio offered that silence. A small house on a quiet hill. The porch overlooked a patchwork of foggy rooftops and unruly gardens. It was nothing like Manhattan, or the crisp high-rises I'd lived in during my assignments in Darnell or Los Imperium. This place creaked when you walked. The garden was wild and overgrown. It didn't sparkle, it breathed. And for the first time in years, so did I. The nights were hardest, full of echoes and ghosts. The betrayal clung to me like smoke. I would wake in the dark, fists clenched, my father's voice replaying like a curse. You're not cut out for this. But on my second day, the doorbell rang. It was Michelle. She stepped inside with arms full of groceries and a bottle of California wine. Practical. Loyal. Fierce in her quiet way. Let's make something edible, she said, kicking off her shoes and marching toward the kitchen like it had always been hers. I didn't cry. But something in me cracked open. And I realized, this wasn't the end of the story. This was the silence before the storm. You're not doing this alone, Michelle said firmly, stepping around my protest like it was a chair in her way. Her voice had that quiet finality I knew better than to argue with. And she was right, because only a few days later, Sharon flew in from Seattle. Sharon brought with her a sharp tongue, a sharper mind, and a bag full of possibilities. We'd met at a tech summit years ago and bonded over bad wine and worse keynote speakers. She knew failure. More importantly, she knew how to rise from it. That first night in San Meridio, the three of us sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor of my still-empty living room, eating greasy pizza from a cardboard box. The overhead light flickered. We didn't care. We talked into the small hours, about ideas, escape plans, dreams stitched together with caffeine and grief. Outside, the fog slipped quietly over the hills. Inside, something sparked back to life. I'm not giving up, I told them, voice tight, hands trembling just a little. Everything I built before, I can do it again. Maybe even better. It wasn't confidence. It was defiance. That's how Novatech Solutions was born, in a living room with bad lighting and 3 women who had been underestimated one too many times. I used the modest savings scraped from 11 years at Carter Innovations. Sharon and Michelle pitched in what they could. It wasn't much. A few laptops. A folding table. A stubborn, shared refusal to fail. The living room became our war room. Some days, it doubled as my bedroom. Our first staff member was my neighbor's orange tabby who refused to leave my keyboard alone. Every dollar mattered. I took freelance strategy work on the side. Michelle built our first website from scratch, teaching herself code over midnight coffee. Sharon worked her contacts in Seattle and the Bay Area, charming tech founders into giving us 15 minutes to prove we were worth something. Those early months were brutal. There were days when just surviving the workday without breaking into tears or shouting was the win. Nights bled into dawn, and more than once I stared at the ceiling replaying my father's voice like a curse, "You're not cut out for this." But Michelle and Sharon never let me fall too far. When the doubt came, quiet but sharp, they dragged me back with reminders. Remember who you are. Remember what you've already survived. We made lists on napkins. Drew flowcharts on windows. Sent cold emails that sometimes got answers. We pitched our ideas to anyone with a Wi-Fi connection and a willingness to listen. We worked until our eyes burned, until sunrise broke over San Meridio and painted the sky in strokes of defiance, pink, gold, and unforgiving. Our first client came from an unexpected place, Gary, a startup founder I'd once met in Los Imperium. He needed help automating his operations. The project was small, the pay barely covered our next rent, but it was a spark. We poured everything into that job, and when Gary's company doubled its output, he recommended us to two more. Word traveled fast. In Silicon Valley, reputation is everything, and we earned ours the old-fashioned way, with sweat and precision. People started to whisper about Novatech, the no-frills team that solved problems others couldn't. Soon, the whispers became inquiries. Then came contracts from San Jose, Palo Alto, even Sacramento. Within a year, we moved out of my living room and into a real office, a renovated warehouse on the edge of downtown. Exposed brick walls. Sunlight pouring through massive windows. A smell of fresh paint and beginnings. I remember walking in that first day and feeling something I hadn't in years. Pride. We didn't have investors or glossy pitch decks. We didn't burn cash. Every client we won, we earned with bare hands and late nights. Every mistake, we owned. Every Richardy, we shared. My friends became my partners in every sense. Michelle evolved into a strategist who could see SteveNet shifts months before they landed. Sharon's confidence opened doors that once seemed bolted shut. And me? I found a voice I didn't know I had, one that led with both steel and empathy. The voice of someone who had bled for her redemption. Of course, it wasn't all triumph. Some deals collapsed days before contracts were signed. Competitors tried to siphon off our hard-won clients. There were weeks when I stared at the numbers and wondered if the roof would cave in. But every time we were knocked down, we stood back up, angrier, wiser, more determined. By our third year, Novatech Solutions had exploded. We went from a whisper to a headline. Our clients expanded from scrappy Bay Area startups to national brands and even a few prestigious firms in Berlin and Oslo. Journalists began circling, calling us the most promising tech company in Amgaria led by women. Venture capitalists, the same ones who once ghosted our emails, now flooded our inboxes. Our annual revenue crossed $3 billion. Even writing that now feels surreal. But it happened. And somewhere in the quiet after those milestones, as the office lights dimmed and the last call of the day ended, I would sometimes sit alone, staring out at the city that had taken me in when I was broken. And I would think, he was wrong about me. But I wasn't finished yet. I had only just begun. There were mornings when I would walk through the halls of our office in San Meridio and feel an almost surreal sense of disbelief. Dozens of engineers, analysts, consultants, all driven, all dreaming, leaning over glowing screens, debating algorithms and strategy. The soft hum of keyboards and focused voices filled the space we'd once imagined in the quiet desperation of my living room. And sometimes I had to stop and remind myself, it began on a floor strewn with pizza boxes and heartbreak. For the first time in my life, I had built something that was mine, not a branch on my father's empire, not a placeholder in someone else's dynasty. Novatech Solutions had risen not from privilege, but from ashes. And with it, I had risen too. It wasn't just success. It was proof. Proof that exile can be a beginning. Proof that betrayal can birth power. People no longer whispered my name as Richard Carter's daughter. They said it with respect, and sometimes, fear. Sharon, innovator, survivor, force. The one who had been cast aside and built an empire larger than the one that once rejected her. And in that clarity, in that silence just after dawn, I found something more elusive than wealth or Richardy. I found freedom. The kind that isn't given. The kind that's seized. I was sitting in my garden one ordinary morning, wrapped in a sweater, coffee warm in my hands, watching mist roll like a veil across the hills. The newspaper lay half forgotten beside me. Most days, I skipped the business section. Too many hollow headlines, too much noise. But that morning, a familiar name caught the corner of my eye like a spark. Carter Innovations facing bankruptcy, company to be auctioned. Time slowed. My breath hitched. The cup froze halfway to my lips. Bankruptcy. The name I'd once defended with everything in me now lay sprawled across headlines like a corpse on display. My father's company. My old life. At first, I just stared at the page. The words blurred and sharpened in turns. Sadness. Anger. Shock. A quiet, undeniable sense of justice. It wasn't just that they had failed, it was that they had failed without me. The company that had discarded me like defective machinery had limped along, and eventually crumbled. I had given Carter Innovations 11 years of my life, had poured my soul into building what they now sought to sell for scraps. But in that golden morning light, a stronger feeling bloomed beneath the pain. Resolve. I remembered every sleepless night, every buried heartbreak, every small triumph that had gone unnoticed, except by me. I thought of my father's cold voice telling me I wasn't needed. I thought of the boardroom applause meant for someone else. And now? Now Novatech stood taller than Carter Innovations had ever dared. I didn't need revenge made of fire and fury. I needed something quieter. Lasting. Proof. I called Michelle and Sharon into the kitchen. They arrived with coffee and wary curiosity. I held up the paper and read the headline aloud. The silence that followed was heavy, but full of unspoken understanding. Michelle tilted her head, smiling with that quiet intensity one knew meant war. You know what you have to do. Sharon raised an eyebrow, already pulling up SteveNet data on her phone. Let's remind them who the real leader is. The auction was 2 weeks away, set in New Ravenhurst. Booking that flight felt surreal. The last time I'd walked through JFK, I was someone shattered, fired, discarded, betrayed. Now I returned as something else entirely. Not a daughter. Not a subordinate. A woman forged in loss, armed with power, and backed by a company that bore no one's name but mine. On the morning of the auction, I wore a black suit. Nothing flashy. No jewelry. I didn't need the room to notice me because of theatrics. They would recognize me for what I had become. The car ride into Manhattan passed in silence. As we neared the towering glass building, memories surfaced like bruises, cold meeting rooms, half-spoken praise, the ache of unworthiness. But I was not that woman anymore. Inside the lobby, people turned, first in recognition, then in hesitation. I saw it in their eyes, uncertainty, discomfort, awe. A few former colleagues from Carter Innovations huddled nearby, their faces pale with stress and shame. They nodded politely, eyes flicking away. I returned the nod without warmth. They were shadows. I was walking toward the light. The auction room buzzed like a hive. Lawyers, bankers, and potential buyers whispered, their voices like wine through a graveyard. I scanned the space. No sign of my father. Only accountants now, representing his interests. Of course. The man who had once ruled this building didn't even have the dignity to watch its fall. And maybe that was fitting. The legacy he built on pride and neglect was ending in silence. But I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to claim what was left. As the auction began, a strange calm took hold of me. Not the absence of nerves, but the presence of something stronger. Certainty. Every scar, every sleepless night, every betrayal and small triumph had brought me here. To this moment. The bidding started low. Cautious voices from investment firms circled like vultures, clearly interested only in the bones, intent on dismantling Carter Innovations for parts, stripping away its history and heart. Then it was my turn. I stood, steady. My voice didn't shake. 750 million, I said. Full acquisition. I'll absorb the debts. And I'll keep the staff. The room hushed. I hadn't just offered the most money, I'd offered mercy. Continuity. Honor. There was a brief attempt to outbid me, thin, performative, but no one matched the number. No one matched the conviction. Within an hour, it was done. Carter Innovations was mine. The company that had once cast me out was now held in my hands, signed and sealed with quiet vengeance. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My name on the contract was enough. I left the courthouse and walked, unaccompanied, through the streets of New Ravenhurst, through a city that had once made me feel small. Now the buildings felt shorter somehow. When I reached the old Carter Innovations headquarters, the weight of memory returned all at once. The marble foyer. The scent of polished wood and ambition. The elevator ride to the top, once filled with anxious breaths and silent rehearsals. But this time I entered as something else. Not an employee. Not a daughter. A reckoning. The executive floor was hushed, stripped of its former pulse. The glow of power had dimmed, replaced by the flicker of uncertain futures. I stepped into the main office, the same room where I once stood, humiliated, diminished. And there he was. Richard Carter. My father sat behind the desk where he had once ruled an empire. Around him, open boxes, scattered files, a fortress of undone things. He looked up as I entered. For a moment, he didn't speak. Neither did I. He looked older, smaller somehow. Shoulders bowed not by age, but by consequence. He was no longer the man who had cast me out like dead weight. He was a man at the end of something, watching the end walk toward him. Finally, he spoke. Sharon. It wasn't quite a greeting. More like the naming of a ghost. I nodded, my voice even. Yes, Dad. I'm the new owner now. Carter Innovations belongs to me. Silence filled the room again, this time not painful, but potent. I saw the realization dawn in his eyes, followed by something unexpected. Not just shock. Regret. Maybe even the faintest flicker of pride. Brian Harris, his golden boy, was nowhere to be seen. Just me. The one he had once told to go home. The one he had dismissed, dismantled, forgotten. But I was still here. And I was stronger than ever. I never wanted it to end like this, he said at last, his voice brittle. I know, I replied softly. But you taught me to fight. To lead. To never back down. And now I'm going to do what you couldn't, save the company. Not as your daughter. As its leader. He didn't argue. He just nodded. And in that moment, the bitterness between us dulled, slightly. We would never fully heal. But perhaps we didn't need to. Some wounds become part of you. Some scars are necessary. Over the following weeks, I met with every remaining employee. I looked them in the eye and told them the truth, no one was losing their job. I listened to what had gone wrong. I asked questions. I made promises. And I kept them. I began merging the best of both worlds, Carter Innovations' legacy with Novatech's fire. We streamlined the bloated systems, tore out the inefficiencies, infused it with purpose. We weren't just rebuilding. We were reforging. Some called it bold. Some called it reckless. I knew it was necessary. Looking back now, I can say this with absolute clarity. Getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to me. It broke me. And in breaking, I found my own shape. It forced me to stop begging for a seat at someone else's table, and build my own damn house. My pain became my power. And in reclaiming Carter Innovations, I didn't just prove something to my father, or the industry, or even the world. I proved it to myself. So if you ever find yourself at the edge, cast out, heartbroken, alone, remember this. Sometimes what you have today is only the ghost of what you'll create tomorrow. If you have the courage to begin again,